People. Welcome, everybody. I am so happy to have all of these great people on the call with us now. I'm really excited about this book that we are going to be talking about today, and delighted that we have the author Eley Williams here with us. And also our host for the day for this special book club is Dr. Sarah Villafranco. So Eley's with us from London, pointing at people and where they are on my screen. And Sarah is with us from Carbondale, Colorado. So we're dealing with all of these different time zones. And I know all of you are in different places around the country and the globe. So thank you for joining us today. I'm going to talk about a couple of quick things, and then I'm going to introduce Tara, my co-host, permanent co-host here. We had once upon a time a really unfortunate Zoom bomb, and for any of you who have already started this wonderful, or finished this wonderful book, or even dug into it, you know that bomb threats are kind of a very integral part of the book. So just to address that possibility, we have another Zoom meeting set up already. Should there be any intrusion in this call, we will end it quickly and send you immediately another invitation for a second meeting that we've got set up. Trying to plan around all these contingencies. And then I want to just mention that save a little room at the end of the call for conversation and chats with the author and with Sarah. And then at the very end, I'm going to announce our next month's book pick. So just a little teaser on that. I'm going to introduce Tara McCready right now, who is my colleague, my other half at the shop, and my friend. And she's the one who had the brilliant idea for us to start a book club. And did you unmute?
Oh, I'm unmuted.
Okay, there she is. Sarah,
yeah, I just wanted to say quickly how excited I am about this book. I picked it. I was drawn in by the cover, I'll be honest, and the title. And this is backwards, but of course you know the book. But I've really always been interested in language and words, and this was such a fun read, such a nice distraction. I learned a lot. I found myself looking up lots of words. I don't know if I remember any of them necessarily, the definitions to some of the more archaic English words, but just what a delight. And so I'm excited to hear this conversation. Let's get it underway. Thank you everyone for joining us. Back to you, Anna.
So quickly, I'm just going to give a little bit of background of why I have drawn Sarah into being a part of this conversation today. I loved this book. I was so happy that Tara suggested it. And as I started reading it, it drew me back to a time in my life that is kind of like a little known fact about me, perhaps, that before I started Proper Talker, I went to law school at Georgetown University Law School. And I had a very brief but very vivid career as a researcher of British legal history. It was a very specific little niche, specifically about Lord Mansfield, who was a very famous legal scholar and innovator. And so that little period of time came back to me in great detail as I read this book. I had a lot of thoughts as Mallory toiled away in her job. It reminded me of my feelings when I worked doing this research, which involved microfiche. I went every day to the law library at Georgetown, checked out microfiche, which probably a lot of you have no idea what that is, but a little piece of film that I would put into a reader. And then I would transcribe these 18th century handwritten legal opinions in that, very fancy handwriting. I would transcribe this, and I have to say that more than once I wondered about whether anybody would notice if I put in my own little, I didn't know the term Mount Weasel, but I think that's what I was thinking. Never did, but I considered it. And I also had that connection that you feel when you are reading someone's handwriting from another century. And of course, this was another century. This was back in the 1900s. But it was a real, you develop this funny connection with somebody you've never met and you don't really know much about, but you invent your own stories about them. So the connection here is that law professor who I was a research assistant to, who was the brilliant scholar in British history, was Sarah's father, Professor James Oldham. Sarah herself was, I believe, a middle schooler at the time, who I occasionally had the pleasure of seeing and babysitting. And then around the time that I left law, which was like 5 minutes after I entered law, I would have remained a research assistant forever, I think, except I graduated. So I worked in law for about a minute, and then I opened my business, which I have to imagine to my parents who paid for my law school, that felt sort of like, thank you very much for this expensive legal education. Now I will train elephants. You know, it was just a complete surprise. But anyway, Sarah was graduating from high school then and worked for me at Proper Topper. She was one of the very first graduating classes of Proper Topper employees. She went on to have a brilliant career. She went to medical school, graduated, worked in emergency medicine for a decade, and then similarly took a different direction to training elephants. She started a wonderful business, Osmia Organic Skincare. It's a fabulous, amazing business that's not just about skincare. It's about, I think she shifted from healing people and repairing people to keeping people healthy and creating this amazing lifestyle. She's brilliant, and she's a writer, and I know this from her published articles as well as anything she's ever written to me and the blog that she keeps on her Osmia site, which is just a treat to read. And so all of this brought to mind how wonderful it would be to hear Sarah, whose life I know was just always kind of a little snow globe of British history, talking to Eley, whose book is just incredible. So Eley is a fellow of the Royal Academy of Literature. She's written numerous short stories, and then this is her first novel, and it's just an amazing work. It's a delight. For any of you who haven't read it yet, I'm excited for you to get to read it. And those of you who have read it, I know you're going to love this. So now I'm going to turn the floor over to Sarah, who will then turn it over to Eley, and we'll get started. And Eley, by the way, I have to say, I'm so thrilled she's with us for many reasons, but among other reasons, I feel especially honored because she has a maybe 10-day-old infant named Ambrose. And so I'm just thrilled that you're sharing your time with us, because I'm sure you would really rather be with Ambrose. So thank you so much. All right. Did you mute me? Okay. Can you unmute Sarah?
I just found my mute button, so here I am. I have a voice, and hopefully Eley does too. Thank you for asking me to host this. It's the first book club I've ever hosted, so I'm very excited. And Eley, again, not only thank you for being here with a 10-day-old, but congratulations and welcome to the club of parenthood. It is, after, trying emergency medicine for 10 years and residency and working 100 hours a week and seeing death and desperation, I can say that parenthood is a harder job than that by far. So I hope that you are off to a great start on your journey. I can't see Eley. Is there a way that, I feel like I'm talking to no one. So is there a way I can see her face?
I wonder if I speak, does that activate it?
Oh yeah, hi, there you are.
Hi, there I am.
Okay, perfect.
Emerged. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I was going to start by telling you a little bit, Anna mentioned, my father is the greatest Anglophile known to man, and especially because he's from Oklahoma. I think it elevates his Anglophilic status. And, every book that was read to me as a child was read in a British accent, and his vocabulary has always been staggering and wonderfully dorky and at times embarrassing. So I totally understand why Anna chose me to meet you. And I was just going to tell one story in my life that I think illustrates the point and then leads into a place I'd love to start with you in your book. So before I married my wonderful husband, I dated a DC cop for 4.5 years. And he ended up being an abusive guy, which is, you know, hard and sucks. And I can't believe I allowed that to happen in my life. And after almost 4 years with him, it was his use of a vocabulary word that made me certain it was over. So he was a cop and he would put his uniform together in this very specific way every day. And he was running late one day and I said to him, hey, do you want me to iron your uniform shirt for you? And he said, no, that's okay, hon. You know how articulate I am. And I was like, oh, you mean meticulous? And I didn't say it. I managed not to say it, which I was proud of. But it was in that moment that I thought, nope, I can't do it. I can't do it. So I am the perfect person for this. And along those lines, it reminded me of that sort of an opening passage of the book where we meet David. And he says, "Apricide." And he says it with fervor, right? And he doesn't mean that word. He means, what is the word he means? Apricity, right? So here's what I love about that introduction and what I want to talk to you about is essentially the importance of language in our understanding of other people. So from this little paragraph where he uses a fancy word, and then you kind of see that he realizes he's misused it, but then he can't quite correct himself, right? Because so he prides himself on his intellect, he enjoys language, he is fallible, and he's too proud to correct himself, right? And we also learn from Mallory's response how gracious she is, right? That she doesn't bring it up. So I think I'm interested to hear a little bit about, you know, have you seen that like big meme that says, I am silently correcting your grammar?
I haven't, but I'm going to seek it out
so,
now.
I mean, we all do it, right? We use people's language to understand things about them. And in many cases, I admit, I judge people based on it, right? Whether it's improper grammar or very proper grammar or interesting vocabulary. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts about how we use language to understand other people and in what ways that's a great thing and in what ways it might not be as good a thing.
I think that's fascinating. And as you say, the way that we use and misuse language so much, especially spoken language as much as written language, is that in conversation, the way in which people try and match each other, whether that's to match kind of implied class lines or a power register, that if someone starts using a very intricate or esoteric or verbose vocabulary, the other person to whom they're speaking will try and match that and will try and say, I know the game, I can play this as well. Mm-hmm. But if, as with the characters that you've mentioned in that chapter, if one of them is trying to be either gracious or wants to be seen to be deferential and lets that other person either use or misuse the vocabulary that they're wielding implausibly, then they can set back their own knowledge of language, and whether that's by using non-standard or slang words to show that they're going for an informality rather than a heightened kind of register, or whether they dumb down their own vocabulary in order to let the other person shine and bring this luster to their own words. I think that in the same way that we do it unconsciously sometimes with body language, whether we stand close to someone if we're wanting to seem aggressive, or we look down and seem more placid and kind of relax our shoulders. I think also through vocabulary and word choice as much as volume and pitch, there's so many ways in which relationships are clarified or shored up or undermined. And I definitely think that that's something that in the novel I wanted to get across, that not only are these characters working with words and understanding lexicography and dictionaries as tools and as resources, but also the way that they can misuse language wittingly or unwittingly and use language as a kind of power marker or a way of demarcating their territory, as it were, definitely.
Yeah, and I sort of find it interesting in our current culture, like when you think about the ways in which, for example, my daughters are in school-age girls, and they've both recently taken either the SAT or the SSAT, neither of which is required anymore by colleges or high schools, because there's so much inequity built into the standardized testing system. And so I think I'm saying that because sometimes when we judge people based on the way they speak, I think in myself, what I'm trying to work on, especially after reading your book, is how to gather information about someone, but stop short of judgment. Right? Like, okay, I can tell from this that from the way this person speaks that he or she has a different education, different culture, different background than I do. Full stop. That's what I know. And that's all I know. Because I think we make these assumptions about what we know about people based on how they use language, but we really don't.
I think that's a really interesting way of treating that idiom of, there must be so many lines in movies and in books where one character will say to the other, I can read you like a book. And that can seem like that's an expression of intimacy. Like, I know you so well, I can read your expression like a book. If someone said, I can read you like a dictionary, that suddenly seems a lot more, the intention there is about trying to clarify and define and kind of have a power over and a rigorous sense of what a person could mean. And maybe that speaks to what you're talking about how a standardizing of language sometimes is about containment and about constriction as much as it can be about communication. And maybe some of the idiosyncratic and eccentricities of a person and of language that they might use or have at their fingertips or make up even, that kind of might be abraded or planed down if we say this is the correct word that can only be used in this context. I think that certainly dictionaries historically have been part of that. I certainly, when I think of a dictionary, certainly before I researched for this novel, I thought of it as something quite rigid and as something very authoritative, and that it had to be both of those things, otherwise it wouldn't be useful. I want to be able to trust a dictionary to be correct and to be the right version of a word's definition, for example. Otherwise it's of no use to me. But of course, because dictionaries are projects by human beings who are flawed and have biases, whether political, ethical, or based in laziness, they contain flaws and they contain discrimination of both sinister and lightheartedness. So certainly I think that a dictionary and people that use dictionaries and make dictionaries have to admit that this idea that they are the only way of registering language correctly must be more flexible than that. And must admit to being more flexible than that.
Yeah, especially when you add the Mount Weasels into the mix, right?
Right, quite right.
In terms of using language in a prescribed way, one thing I really like about your writing is that you refuse to contain the senses to themselves. And so this is interesting to me because the tagline of my skincare brand, Osmia, is return to your senses. And, it's twofold. One is like, wake up, pay attention to what you're putting on your skin, how it's impacting your health and the environment. Also, stop obsessing, step away from the magnifying mirror. It doesn't really matter. And thirdly, be in your senses. So when you're making your cup of tea in the morning, like, feel the steam on your face and smell, like really smell, and then taste, and all of those tiny moments, whether it's picking up your kid who just barked in a trash can at the park, you know, it's like all of those moments, they can either pass us by or we can really like steep in the sensory nature of them. And so a quote that I pulled that I loved is this. It is she's talking about the photograph, the old photograph that they found of the century ago staff of Swansby's. And it says, "It is a color that leads you to believe that if you were ever moved to lick the photograph, it would taste of toffee and bourbon and bookshop dust." And I found that in a couple other places where you are crossing sensory barriers in your language. So his footsteps rang with odd shadows. That was really cool because there was a sound and sight, a visual that crossed over, and then a smell that you first sensed in your stomach before any flavor hit your nose. That's like a whole bunch of different things woven in. And I'm interested to hear like a little bit about the way you use senses like this. Are you like this in your life? Are you a very sensory person, always noticing your environment in a tactile and sensory way, or is it more something you do in your writing?
I think that I share with, I guess, with everyone that, particularly with memory, certain memories can be conjured up, which at first flush seem like they have nothing to do with the circumstance that I'm currently in. And it will be that they've been incited, instigated, ignited by a certain sensorial abruption. So, for example, if someone, it's a shame that we're not all in proper topper and can enjoy each other sensorily in quite the same way, apart from the visual, which is wonderful. But if someone, say, opened a satsuma or a tangerine in the audience, that smell of the satsuma and the tangerine, that would bring back immediately, I'd be in the school canteen for whatever reason. That's not the most exotic location that I might have that sensation, but I'm just there. Well, for someone else, that might remind them of when they had a holiday on the Riviera. Of someone else, it might remind them of when they were arrested and a tangerine just rolled past them in a kind of Scorsese-ish event. But that notion that one's experiences of places and actions and even with emotions, that it isn't just visual cues that we're receiving, it is the temperature of the air at that moment, it is maybe a bird song that we weren't even conscious of necessarily at the moment, it is taste. Certainly some of my earliest memories, I think, are based on, yes, to an extent, the look of fabrics, but the feel of certain fabrics, where I can't remember what the upholstery was, I can't remember where the curtain was in whatever house, but I just remember the feeling of velvet, and I remember the kind of slight starchiness of whatever brocade was on whatever stool. And I think that that doesn't quite flip into synesthesia, where those experiences of those senses are crossed over, so that, you know, whenever you hear the word Monday, you see the color yellow or you smell a certain smell. But I think that senses often run in parallel when it comes to memory. And I think that because with many of the characters in the novel, their business is in being definite, in being able to say, this is what I see, this is the right word for that, or this is the definition for that word that you've just used. The fact that they might all have these very personal and in many ways indefinable experiences, and that it is only through sensory processing that they're able to acquit themselves or express their experience, rather than through language that is necessarily understood by everyone in the room. I think that I do enjoy mixing the metaphors of senses in writing, and I guess if it's overplayed, then it becomes too mixed a metaphor, and it becomes jumbled to the point of not communicating anything. But sometimes we have days like that, I think.
And interestingly, and And I understand it because trying to describe scent to people, you know, when you're like trying to, you know, share the smell of something to someone who's not there, I say things a lot like it smells pointy, you know, or purple. And I, you know, I thought of that reading this, like it's just a cool way to cross those barriers and to make things more understandable.
Right, that's a really good example. And similarly, if you were to say, oh, this cream, it smells of sandalwood, and you were to be that exact, you don't know that for them, sandalwood may be very evocative for someone they dislike a lot. So
Right.
by saying kind of, I don't know what you would say the kind of adjective would be, but like a kind of smooth hollowness to it, they will have an instinct and a reaction to that doesn't
Let me write
require
that down, because we have a sandalwood body mist, so I'm just going to sell it with
have
that.
that for free.
Yeah, exactly. That's very cool. So if you ever want to interrupt me, please do. I jotted down a couple of concepts and so I'm sort of jumping a bit. But I just like, when I finished the book, I just like, I sat with it like this for a little bit, petting it like a kitten, because I just think there's so much in it. And I think in a way, while there's so much fun stuff to talk about with vocabulary and words and dictionaries, there's some really much bigger things in this book that I really touched me. So one of them is really the way that Mallory and Winsworth, a century apart, share this trait of I guess initially I would call it tentativeness. And, you know, examples, you know, the scene where David spoke at her for 3 minutes while she had an egg in her mouth. You know, not many people are going to like hold that. I would be like, hey, hold on 1 sec, I'm eating. She just kind of stays there, right? Or the way Winsworth, you know, is always sort of noticing how he gets talked over, or how nobody notices when he leaves a room. The one where it really pointed it out to me was when Pip was on the phone with the, you know, bomb threat person, and she's like having at him. She's like, you listen here, you know, and you think about how different that is to the way Mallory just kind of almost cowered a little bit. But when so in a way, you know, there's that shared trait of what seems like tentativeness. But as the book develops, like, it seems to me that they both end up enviably sure of what's important to them in the world. Far more so than people like Frasham or David, who seem, you know, like very confident, but it sort of makes you feel sadder for the people who have it all figured out than the people who don't.
And I think that's a great observation. And I think that certainly I didn't want it to be that these are two nervous people and neurotic people in many ways who lack confidence and then are having to suffer for that as the novel goes on. These are characters who do lack confidence and often are not in positions of power and don't really do much to ensure that they could be in positions of power. They are deferent. They do. They're quite passive in many ways, whilst resenting their passivity. And I did want them, as the novel progresses and their characters develop, for their confidence to come not necessarily in wanting to wrest power from other people or to change who they are, but realize that they have the right to take up space in the world, and they have a right to want things, and to be motivated to have those things, and they have a right to be loved, and they have a right to seek out love. So in many ways, the book, for both of their timelines, both the contemporary and the 19th century timelines, it's about two people who go from being in the thrall of language to actually being able to take some responsibility with language and with their own lives. But I very much like the way that you describe it, and their kind of pairing in that way was important to me in structuring the book, certainly.
Yeah, it's really cool. And the way you just said that, the way that they both have experience with and in a way an obsession with language. but haven't been able to use it really to their advantage, or in a way that is authentic to who they are. I mean, to the point of Winsworth developing a lisp, like the most inauthentic thing, you know, just and just to sort of evoke this feeling of, I don't know, pity or something from people. But it's cool the way that, I mean, at the end, it seems Winsworth finds his voice when it comes to Sophia, or in the audiobook, they call her Sophia. I don't know if that's how you meant it to be, but, and I want to talk
I'll take anything.
Anyway, when it comes to Sophia or Sophia, you know, she's been sort of screwing with him, and in a way that seems a little like a cat playing with an injured mouse at times, you know, and you're like, would you stop this poor guy, you know? And at the end, he finds his voice with her and says, like, you're toying with me, you know, and that's sort of like this vindicating moment. And it's a tiny moment, but the way he's able to find his voice. And then again, with Mallory at the end, when one of the people who responded to the bomb going off said, are you together? And, you know, Mallory stands up and says, yes, you know, and in that simple word, she's found her voice that feels authentic and true to her. Really.
No, I'm really glad you highlight both of those episodes really in the novel, because especially with Sophia and with Pip, you know, they're not main characters, but they become the focus of the main characters in a way that you feel it is toying with their emotions. They are not able to feel like both Mallory and Winsworth are able to divulge their real feelings to the fullest extent with Pip and Mallory, because Mallory is kind of poleaxed by her inability to express herself as she might want to, and with Winsworth, what is it? I don't know. He doesn't feel like he's worthy. He doesn't know really who this woman is or what her intentions are. And as you say, it's only towards the end that he kind of cottons on that she is not this icon that he needed her to be, and that she has her own mischievous ends and motivations. So no, I think that you're quite right that it's important for me that they were able to announce for themselves and to find words for themselves that perhaps they've been struggling to know how to care about, let alone find the right words throughout the rest of the novel.
Yeah, very cool. I mean, there are times, you know, she says at one point, you know, didn't you look smart? You're quite the picture when you're not waylaying pelicans. And it just feels so patronizing, you know, but not long after that, you sort of find out that she's, you know, with Frasham for probably financial reasons, and she knows he's messing around on her. And, you know, you realize, like, oh, is she just, in a sense, being a bully? Like, is she just, you know, making up for her own kind of unhappiness by poking at this hapless guy who's not going to speak up, you know?
Yeah, I quite enjoyed writing Sophia, because she's, in many ways, she is a complex character, but she doesn't want to give away any of her complexity. She is quite happy with being taken at face value, and for that face value to change, to become a kind of Janus kind of figure, Janus, I don't know, and in the same way that the Mount Weasels, these fake words that enter the dictionary, are meaningless intrusions that kind of undermine the whole project of the dictionary. Similarly, I wanted Sophia to be this intrusion that is delightful and meaningful to people that find her meaningful, but ultimately aren't the answer, aren't the definition, aren't the grand formula that can change everything or define a world or a life. And that's where that ends. It doesn't have some higher purpose or some higher use. Its complexity is simple in that way.
Yeah. So in the purpose department, I'm going to read this quote. This is Winsworth. he veered from imagining the mischief he would cause with this non-thing, the Mount Weasels, this practical joke, this overlookable nonsensing, to accepting that his hoax entries were the one act that he would ever be not known for, and his only chance of leaving a trace on the world. I thought that the concept of purpose, of permanence, of making a mark was really interesting in this book. And you know, you talk about, like, at the end, you know, Swansby's is going up in flames, right? And you see, it's such a like tangible feeling. I mean, you're watching these blue index cards fritter away into the air, and you think, oh my God, you know, Winsworth's like, his big plot, right, is just, it just went up in flames. And that makes you like, that's the whole, what is the meaning of life question, right? But then you remember that in the language of flowers, they refer to Abatina and Abecedary because of him. And then you start to wonder, well, in what other ways are our ripples felt in places that we don't imagine? And this is both a hopeful and wonderful thought to me. And it's also a warning, a reminder that words can have very lasting effects in places that may not be obvious, in overheard conversations or people interpreting something in a way that you didn't intend at all. Anyway, so I guess, you know, one thing I loved about that passage was, or just the way you wrote that, from him taking this stand and wanting to leave a mark to, you know, watching it all go away, is just this idea that even if you don't really know your purpose in the world, doesn't necessarily mean you don't have one.
Yeah, I think that's a great reading of it, and also that you can often be defined in terms of your absence or in terms of what you're not. And if you don't define yourself, and if you don't make your mark, as you say, that doesn't mean that no mark will be left. It'll just mean that other people will come up with the words for you and apply them to you in your absence. And I think that, you know, it is literally with Winsworth that he is inscribing these new words and having a kind of legacy through them, because they have this currency when they didn't exist before. But in doing that, he's not this creator god puppet master that's then given any new power or yeah, just power, I suppose. He doesn't even have that, because he is anonymous. He is not known by anyone, even the person who 100 years later is seeking him out necessarily, or his work out there. I am interested in characters that tend to be either in the wings of things or desperate to be on the stage and under the spotlight in various ways, but just don't have the gumption to do it or the skill to do it. I think that I'm interested in, as you say, the tentativeness, but also diffidence and lack of confidence, and how often that is charged or at a tension with the hopes or aspirations that person might have, and how that can become either a reason for them to make the decision to advocate for themselves or to take charge of their life and make good decisions, or that they might make the right decision to keep in the background and to recede in a certain way. And I think that in that passage, certainly I was trying to imagine how one thinks about the marks we leave on the world, and whether we just want to or not.
I'm going to jump in for just a little second to say that and I'm probably a wee bit late on this one. I think I sort of sold it as you don't have to have read the book yet, and if you haven't finished the book, don't worry. So we may have given away a little bit of the ending. It's okay. But I also think it might be, I think it's okay. But I wonder if it would be helpful to Eley to have you give just a little synopsis of, do you mind doing that, of just kind of the outline of the story, and a little bit about what Mount Weasel is, in case there's anybody who is confused by what we're talking about?
Yeah, sure. basically the novel is set in two time periods. You may have picked up on that. On the one hand, it's based around the events in a fictional dictionary house where a 19th century lexicographer called Peter Winsworth is bored at his job. He is meant to be part of compiling this dictionary in a staff of hundreds. He's overlooked, he's overworked, and in order to really assert a sense of creative agency, he starts inserting fake words into the text of this dictionary that's in draft form. The other half of the novel, and it alternates between the timelines, between the chapters, is set in the contemporary world, where an intern called Mallory is set the task of finding these fake words that have entered the dictionary in the 19th century. And these fake words are made up for the purpose of the novel, but the inspiration for them are the real fictitious words, if that makes sense, that exist in dictionaries and encyclopedias. The most famous of these is named after an entry in a dictionary that was published in, thanks to Columbia University in New York. And the entry is for a biographical encyclopedic entry for Lillian Virginia Mountweasel. And it gives a little account of what her life was like, as you might imagine from a real entry in an encyclopedia. So it says that she was born in Bangs, Ohio, and she died tragically aged 33 while on a commission for Combustibles magazine in an explosion. And, you know, at first glance, that seems like it might be real. It's got some weird coincidences. It almost seems like wordplay with Bangs, Ohio, and then being on commission with Combustibles and dying in an explosion. And the reason for that is that it is completely made up. It's basically a little short story, a potted little allegory almost, that someone had inserted into the copy, into the text of the dictionary, and then was printed. And the reason that it was inserted in this real dictionary, and you can find, I think it's 1975, the edition of it in the Columbia Encyclopedia. The reason that this fake entry is there is so that it can act as a copyright trap. So that if I'm writing a dictionary and Sarah's writing a dictionary, it would be very easy for me to just copy Sarah's, because words are words are words. However, if Sarah inserts a fake word, one of these Mountweasels, into her dictionary and it ends up in mine, she'll be able to tell that I've pirated her text. So encyclopedias and dictionaries and many works of reference include these fake little details that are kind of harmless, because no one's actually going to look up Mountweasel because she doesn't exist. So that's not quite a lie, but it is very much a falsehood. It is a fiction nestling within a compendium of fact. And I was inspired by the real life history and realization of these fake words and fake facts, to think about, well, who has inserted these words, and what kind of mechanisms, creative mechanisms, are at play in making up words? Why might we actually want new words as individuals? And what is the process by which words enter dictionaries and language? So that's a quick précis of what the novel's about and what Mountweasels are, that strange word that I suppose we've been bandying about without necessarily defining, ironically.
Anna, you're muted.
Thank you. And were we going to do a reading before we open it up? Or Sarah, do you have more?
Let's see, I don't know if we have a time limit. I have 2 more things on my list, yeah, but I can also just skip them.
You go. I'm sure they're brilliant. And I'm going to mute myself.
Oh, I'm certain of it. Yeah. Let's see, Ellie, I was, another theme that I found kept reaching out from the pages and poking me was just humanity. And so I give this quote as my example. This is, again, Winsworth speaking, and he compared his own pale, forgettable body, already goose-pimpling in the cold of his bedroom, with Frasham's easy half-nakedness in the dark beneath the scrivenery. And I just found like there were so many examples of places where you showed people's tender underbellies, right? You see David playing online chess in his office. And ultimately, you know, well, I won't give away like all of the things, but there are some other moments where you realize just how, I don't want to say weak because that's, but just there's like a little, it's a little sad, you know, and with the faking of the lisp and, you know, Mallory's inability to kind of like just be out at work. And I'm just interested in how you feel like exposing these underbellies, what it does for us as the readers.
I think exposure is a really good word for what I was interested in there. The idea that we are all, however bombastic we are and however controlled or composed we are, we have vulnerabilities, and maybe that vulnerability might be our composure or our need to seem composed. And there's so much that is vulnerable in the quotidian, in the familiar, in the day-to-day, in the embarrassing or the weak, that we all perform, sometimes for ourselves, sometimes for other people. And I also think that therein lies our tenderness, our willingness to show those vulnerabilities to other people, or our unwillingness to show them and to try and, you know, armor ourselves up against it. I think there can be something very toxic about that. There can be something very fragile about that. And I find that very moving, that we are all vulnerable and handle each other either with care or should do. And I think that often in my writing, my characters don't know how to treat themselves and their vulnerabilities. So often find that they have to quiet down themselves and not be seen and kind of scurry in the shadows rather than ask for help or cry out in pain or cry out in passion because they don't want to attract attention. And I think there is tenderness there, and that's because of that vulnerability and exposure that they're frightened of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really beautiful. And in a way, I feel like it connects me to every other reader of this book, you know, because it triggers your own stuff, you know, and you ask, what's my underbelly look like? And just kind of knowing, it's like when I was having one of my daughters, the midwife said to me at a fairly critical moment when I was about to just give up on the whole thing, she said, Sarah, there are like 15,000 women giving birth with you right now.
Right.
And it like changed everything for me. I drew this strength from it and this feeling of like invincibility. And I found that when I was reading this book, you know, just that notion that we all have these blemishes, tender spots, like just sensitivities, whatever it is, and it's different for every one of us, but there's nobody who can read the book and not feel that and not connect to that tender moment. And in a world that's felt like it's had a lack of tenderness lately, it's sort of a beautiful thing.
I mean, I think maybe this is a digression, but what you've just said, that very powerful image that you've just this account that you've given of what the midwife said to you, it reminds me, my sister lives in Denmark, so not so far away from Britain, but far enough away for me to miss her a lot. And there's the town where she lives in is called Aarhus, and in the town square there, it's quite a small town. In the town square, it's kind of lined with cafes and these old wrought iron lampposts. And I was visiting her there, and it was quite it was early in the evening, but because it's Scandinavia, it was quite dark. And the lights suddenly all dimmed around the square and then went bright again. And everyone raised their glass and said, cheers. And I said, what on earth's happening? And they said, the lights here are on a system whereby in the hospital, every time a baby is born, we dim the lights, then brighten them again. So everyone knows that there's a new baby in the town. And for me, not only was that, you know, I'm getting kind of goosebumps now, but not only was that a real literal exposure of a community celebrating new life in that way and registering a change that's happened, But also there was this word, this cheers, that people were looking to each other and gesturing and saying a single word. Sometimes people speaking in unison could be very threatening. Sometimes it could be like a war cry or something like that. But this and the setting of it, because it was unfamiliar to me in many ways, felt so strange and yet still convivial and important. I think the language can do that. And it's very memorable to me when I think about words and community and how that can be a powerful connecting thing rather than an othering thing, or a way of, as we talked about with the first question, kind of laying out territories or power dynamics, that it can be a thing of togetherness rather than separation.
Yeah. I think that sort of leads into the last little quote that I highlighted, which is a moment at the end of the book where Mallory, you know, has had one understanding of another character, and that understanding gets shifted pretty radically. And there's a single sentence, and it says, "It is hard to shift from one way of understanding the world." And I like stopped and put my pencil down on that one, because I just thought that's the complexity of human existence summed up in one sentence. That's everything we've been experiencing. And, you know, I don't know, I don't want to dive too deeply into politics, but I know that Anna and I have been in a place of deep unhappiness for the last 4 years. Because of a leader that made no sense to us. And my understanding of the world was so vastly different from him and his supporters. And I, you know, it's not really to say that I'm right, although maybe I think I'm a little bit more right than Donald Trump. But I think it's just, that's such a brilliant and simple observation, that it is so hard to shift your way of understanding the world. And it's, I don't know how do we like get better at that? Because right, when you think of the divisiveness of sticking to your understanding of the world, you really don't make progress when you root down into what you believe. And, you know, it's even just the changing of the vocabulary, the definition of marriage in the book, right? I mean, you can root down into the way it's always been defined, or you can say, no, there's been a shift in understanding of what this word means, or this, you know, and I don't know, I just thought it was such a like great summary of, and so relevant to the dictionary concept, which is ever shifting and evolving our understanding of the world, of the universe.
Yeah, and I'm glad that was resonant. And I do think that, you know, dictionaries to an extent, especially when they're printed rather than digital, they reflect a fixed moment, and that moment is part of history, which is part of narratives, which is often written by the victors or the people with the loudest voices. And I think it's important to reflect on the fact that language is always changing, that something that this year is a slang term might become part of standard English even in the next month or so. The fact that, you know, a year ago, I don't know if anyone in Britain really knew what the word furlough meant, and now we're all very much at the sharp end of trying to understand and define that in the best terms possible. So I think that I'm very enamored with dictionaries as being kind of capsules of moments in history, but it's very important for me to remember that also language is something far more supple than that, and that has to permit change if it is to be meaningful, and for language and words to have meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so we can maybe extrapolate that to say that we too need to be flexible in our understanding of the world, and maybe try to think of it not as something that's locked and, you know, and set, but as something that should keep evolving. And even when it's hard for us to listen and understand from someone's perspective, there's probably a little underbelly of vulnerability there that you can connect on, you know, whether it's suffering or poverty or, you know, just sadness or lonely. There's all these things that are at the root of all of it. Anyway.
I think that's very well put. I agree.
Anna, I want to leave time. I don't know what our timeline is, but if it's a great time to open to questions for Eley, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I think this is a great time. Thank you. That was just beautifully. Yeah, and you guys had some deep thoughts there. I'm watching our chat to see if there are any questions, but I don't see any lingering out there. Does anybody want to jump in with, you can type in a question, and if not, we can keep going with our questions. I love your observations there, Sarah. I think that, so I thought that so often in reading your book, Eley, and generally in art, that what we all respond to is that vulnerability that is, you know, the thing that makes somebody a really compelling character, is that they've got little quirks or little insecurities, and it makes us human, and it's what we react to. And certainly in the tender characters in this book. And then you kind of wonder why people aren't kinder to each other generally, because we all obviously respond to that and feel that. So anyway, your characters were something I really love about this book. Among the many things I love about it is that the characters are all have kindness in them, that there's not, you know, some are a little less lovable than others, because you have to have that to make a story, but there was not a supervillain or you know, there was a lot of humanity there. I really,
yeah, I think even the kind of dastardly villain Fresham, we kind of understand his motivations. That it's not just motiveless malignancy. He has desires and he has hungers, and we can, or I wanted him to be viewed so that that's not commendable, but it is perhaps understandable from his perspective. No, I treasure kindness. What a profound thing to say. Like, I think it's important to think about kindness in characters. And if everyone is an anti-hero, I find that quite chilling to read. And that can be a good thing. That can be very motivating and thrilling to read. But I enjoy the complexity of writing about kind characters and flawed characters, definitely.
I have a question here for you, from Tara. What word would you ascribe to mispronouncing words that you've only seen in print?
Ooh, you put me on the spot.
Like Sophia, I mispronounced
Yeah.
it.
Right. Oh, I'd love to come up with a good one. I'm worried that now that I'm on the spot. Let's think. So it would be kind of something to do with cross purposes. Well, it's a bit like there's that in British drama, there's a character from the 18th century, I think, from Ben Jonson, called Mrs. Malaprop. It's not Ben Jonson. I'm trying to be cleverer than I am. And she uses words incorrectly all the time. So something to do with kind of a visual malapropism, malapropism. How's that, Tara? Take that.
I'm gonna share something that my daughter Lucy will be angry at me for sharing probably, but she had the reverse of that recently, of a word she'd only heard a lot recently, a name that she'd been hearing and she'd not seen it written. And when she finally saw it written, she said, "Oh, that makes so much more sense." It's our new Secretary of State, whose name is Tony Blinken, and she had always heard it as Tone Abe Lincoln.
Nice.
Like a rap name, Tony. Anyway, so she had the reverse, but that's what she gets for not being on camera. I'll tell stories about her.
But look, when her rap career takes off, she's got one ready to go.
So we've got questions about the pelican, and you know, you have to talk about the pelican. That just begs to be discussed.
Right. Well, there's a real
is,
place.
the pelican. So anyway.
A question and a statement, an explanation. It might be a pelican on the other end of the keyboard. There's a real place in London called St James's Park, and weirdly enough, there are pelicans in it. Pelicans are very much not native to the UK. It is far either too chilly or too boring for them to be native to here, but they were gifts in the, I think, the 17th century to the monarchy of the time, I think from the Russian state. And since then, we've always had pelicans, rather improbably, in St James's Park. And I wanted to stage an absurd scene near the Swansby Dictionary House that in a way was in keeping with some of the 19th century nonsense literature of, say, Lewis Carroll or Edward Lear, where an animal that looks quite absurd in a very metropolitan setting is confronted and encountered with and to and by characters who don't know what to do with it. And I feel like pelicans occupy that kind of taxonomy of animals, a bit like walruses and flamingos and koalas, where there's just something a little bit strange and otherworldly about how they look. They look a little bit like they've been designed by committee rather than anything else. And I like that they seem nonsensical. And in a book about nonsense and making sense of words, I wanted Winsworth to have an encounter of sorts with one of these animals, and I'm glad that I was able to orchestrate one for that purpose. But yeah, that is a rare moment of violence in the book, and don't do it at home. Keep it in fiction. I think I saw another question, but I now can't see the comments, so sorry if I'm peering at a question and not answering it.
I see one that says, one of the first books that I read that I loved because of its use of language was Ella Minnow P. Are you familiar with it?
Oh yeah, that's a brilliant book. And again, in terms of nonsense and the generative constraints of language. So for those of you that haven't read it, Ella Minnow P.
I just got it.
Oh, you'll love it. It's amazing.
No,
that's a great
I just got the Ella Minnow P part.
Yeah.
I didn't get it.
Oh,
now
get the book too, as well as the
yeah.
motif. I forget who it's by. It's by Mark something. It's brilliant. Yes, I loved it. Very much. I mean, it's an epistolary novel. It's incredible how he's able to write it so it is meaningful. As I mean, I don't want to give anything away because it's so clever. But basically, on this island, it becomes impossible for inhabitants of the island to use certain letters of the alphabet as the narrative continues. And as that is the reality for the people living on the island, they are unable to literally use those letters in the letters that they're sending. So the author is having to write these communication letters as different letters from the alphabet are being strimmed from their possible vocabulary. It's very, very clever and very funny. Yeah, that's a great recommendation. Loved it.
Ellie, I have one question that I was thinking of because of the I listened to the audiobook and I read the paper book, and I'm interested, I'm curious about, as an author, I mean, is it hard to hand your work to someone and hear it performed? I mean, are there times when you're like, ugh, that's not how I pictured that? And do you have any say in it, or does it just, I don't know, can you comment on their performance and like request changes, or is it just a done deal?
In my case, it was a done deal. I had a choice of the actors. So some of the actors' other work was shown to me, and I was given a choice of who I prefer of them. Other than that, I had no control over it, and I'm, in this instance, very, very happy with that. I think that I'm very glad that they made the decision for the audiobook to have two readers, so one for the Winsworth parts and one for the Mallory parts. I think that it very much is intended as a novel of two different voices, both vying for attention, but also kind of wrestling for the attention of the reader while the narratives braid together. And I think if it was just one voice, I would feel like one was being privileged over the other. So I'm thrilled with how it came out. I don't know how many of you write fiction or non-fiction, but I find it very important to me when I'm editing that I'm able to read aloud and just hear on the ear, rather than any other kind of hearing, where there are repeated words or where the rhythm of sentences might seem a bit off, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. And I find that useful for the editing process. As I say, I would be the worst reader of my own work, especially with something this length, just because I would second guess myself, and I'd be trying to edit as I go and say like, oh, that really, you know, there are too many words beginning with F there, it seems too fricative or whatever. So no, I'm thrilled with what it sounds like, and I'm very thankful to the production team and to the actors for the work that they did. It's great.
Yeah, it was really enjoyable to listen to, and I even the cadence of like the speed at which Mallory speaks compared to the speed at which Winsworth speaks was reflective to me of their ways of being in the world too. So I thought that was really well done.
I'm so glad. It's funny that we're talking about audio drama. For various reasons, I'm in the kitchen, and my cat, you may hear in the background, is using the litter tray very loudly. So I really apologize for those of you listening with headphones. That are just, oh, great. So I've just narrated something.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Something for the real fans.
Anna, did you have a passage that you wanted Eley to read before we finish? You're muted. Yep.
I sent you a couple of choices, Eley. Did either of those resonate with you as ones to?
Oh yeah, sure. So I think one was on page 124. Yeah, so
there were so many sentences and passages that I had to just stop and reread while I was reading it and kind of admire for a little while, because your writing is just so beautiful, and some of the sentences were just like a little masterpiece in and of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's very kind. I'll now undermine that very kind sentiment by reading it aloud and demonstrating why I was very much not the person to do it on the audiobook.
No, it's lovely.
Let's see. So this part, Winsworth, in fact, is in St. James's Park, so it's just prior to the Pelican scene. And he's had a long day at the office. He is hungover, and he's falling asleep. And in part here, what I wanted to do is, as much as think about vocabulary, but also think about the sentences and the structure of sentences. How might one write in text something that corresponds with the idea of ideas that are drifting together, and your kind of experience of the world becoming a little blurry and muddied. So I'll just read a little bit there. But falling asleep now would muddy the rest of the day and spoil any chance of rest this evening. Finish the cake, he told himself. Take one more turn around the park to get the blood going and face the day renewed. He dug his glasses into the bridge of his nose and winched his face to the sky, willing himself into wakefulness. Two birds veered overhead, chatting and braiding the air. It might have been his imagination, but a dandelion seed seemed to drift through his line of sight and join them. He wondered whether anyone would miss him if he just stayed put amongst the weeds, kicking the clocks of dandelions until facelessness, and spending the afternoon not among paper and letters and words, but instead here, head to and in and of the clouds, counting birds until the numbers ran out. There were funny, oily little wild birds in the park, some of which he recognized, surely too early for starlings. Starlings with feathers that's star-spangled and glittersome. One brave bird hopped by his feet for cake crumbs, while still more were flitting above his head with the dandelion seeds, blown wishes finding a smooze in the air. And the best bench-side exoticisms January could offer were all on show. The starling, the dandelion, the blown seeds, and the birds scanning against the grey clouds, hazing it and mazing it. A featherlight kaleidoscope, noon damp, and knowing the sky was never truly grey, just filled with 1,000 years of birds' paths and wishful seeds. A bird seed sky is something meddled and ripe and wish-hot. The breeze, bird breath soft like a, what? Heart stopped in a lobby above one's lungs, as well it might, as might it will. Seeds take a shape too soft to be called a burr, like falling asleep on a bench with the sun on your face. Seeds in a shape too soft to be called a globe, too breakable to be a constellation, too tough to not be worth wishing upon. The crowd of birds, an unheard murmuration, plural noun, not led by one bird, but a cloud folly of seeds, blasted by one of countless breaths, escaping from blasted, wished upon clock as breath, providing a clockwork with no regard to time nor hands, flocking no purpose, or rather flocking with no purpose other than the clotting and thrilling and thrumming, a flock as gathered ellipses rather than lines of wing and bone and beak, falling asleep, grey-headed rather than young and dazzling, more puff than flower, collecting the ellipses of empty speech bubbles, the words never said or sayable, former pauses in speech as busy as leaderless birds, twisting, blown apart softly to warm and colour even the widest of skies. Well, so that I wouldn't say that's necessarily characteristic of the whole book, but it was a moment where I wanted to kind of disrupt the kind of formal regularity of sentence structure as Winsworth is falling asleep.
That was beautiful. I love that. It's poetry.
Thank you.
So well done. Thank you so much. It was just such a joy to meet you and hear this in your own voice and have this have this time with you. Sarah, thank you so much too I mean, I loved hearing what you guys had to say to each other.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and it really is a complete honour to be part of this company, and thanks for your kind words and encouragement. I hope you're all keeping safe and warm. And
you too. How are things there?
They're okay. They're okay. I think a bit less snowy than they are where you are, but no, they're doing okay. And now that my cat's finished doing what they're doing, they're even better. Consummate professional.
Now you get to go from the litter box to the diaper pail.
Brilliant. What a world. What a spectrum I operate on.
It's lovely. And you've got a lifelong fan here. Thank you so much. I can't wait to see what else happens.
Me too.
More novels, please.
Yes.
Yeah.
We'll see. From your words to God's ears. Thanks very much, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank
you. Thank you. And just quickly, I'm going to say that our next book is Creatures by, my goodness, I just forgot the name of it, Chrissy Van Meter. That will be our next book club book. And then I'm going to send a little follow-up email to everyone with a very kind, generous special offer from Sarah for purchases from Osmia for our special customers. So you'll be getting that. And again, Osmia is just amazing. So that's a real treat. But the biggest treat is having time with Sarah, with Eley. Thank you so much. Thank you. And be well, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Stay healthy.